Thank you everyone for joining. My name's Rose, if you haven't already heard, and I will be your Sculpd Potter today. Today we're going to be doing a masterclass on how to make a pinch pot jug, and we're so excited to be collaborating with Papier on this masterclass, and also our special Sculpd and Papier notebook, and I'll show you a few sketches that I've done later which I have used to design a few different jugs that I would like to make, and it is the perfect way to get ready to make whatever piece you want to make. So, for anyone who has joined since we last said, don't know if you've heard this a million times already, but it's handy to have a small glass or a bowl of water to work with in front of you, and also to have something like a wooden chopping board to work onto. So, in our kits today, or don't worry if you don't have a kit or are using just a bag of clay instead of the full kit, but the Sculpd clay that we use, or the clay that hopefully you have at home, is air dry clay. So air dry clay, as the name suggests, is just clay that dries in air. So it's perfect for us to work with at home because it means that you don't need to fire it in a kiln. I would be very impressed if anyone does have a kiln at home, but you certainly don't need it. So when we finish making our piece today, all that you have to do for it to be ready to go and to decorate is to leave it out to dry for about 2 to 3 days. It should hopefully be 2 days, but you know, if your boiler's broken or something, all of those things can just slightly adjust it. But it should definitely be dry in a couple of days. So once your piece is completely dry, you'll know it's dry when it is kind of a much lighter shade of grey, completely hard and a little bit chalky or a bit powdery to the touch. It's what we call bone dry, and it will be very different to the completely fresh kind of mid-grey clay that we'll be working with today. When your piece is completely dry, that is ready when it is ready to go to paint and decorate. So if you have gone and checked out our Instagram or our website and got some inspiration for decoration techniques, you might be raring to go on painting your pot. If you are wanting to paint your pot, what you're going to do is paint it with the paint that we have in our kits first, and then seal it second with the sealant. If you would like to experiment around with some colours, we do have a couple of paint kits on our website. We've got classic kind of bright primary dual colours paint set, and also pastel paint set, but any acrylic paint will work well on the clay. And then in terms of sealing it, the sealant in our kits is great and will make your piece nice and water persistent and a bit hardier, but if you don't have the kit, then you know you can always experiment with your own varnish. We also in the kits have a few tools. We've got a couple of knife tools, a fork tool, the ribbon tool, which is for carving with, which I'll show you later, and a needle tool. And again, don't worry if you don't have the kit and you don't have these tools. That is absolutely fine, because any of the techniques that I'll show you today, even if they do include a tool, there will always be a handy kind of like at-home fix for that. So don't feel like you can't do a certain step because you don't have the knife tool, for instance. We also have a sponge. That is just for kind of cleaning up our piece, rehydrating it a little bit if it starts to dry out from the warmth of our hands, and can also be great for painting your piece with. So, if everyone is there and ready to go, I'll start by showing you the lovely jug that we are going to be making today. So we're going to make something like this, and it's a really lovely form to make, and it's also a really simple one for us to make. So we can just make it out of a single lump of clay, plus a little bit extra for the handle. And it's a great way to show you how you can start making bigger pieces with the pinch pot form. So if any of you have already checked out the tutorials on our website, or if you want to go and check out later, then we do have a tutorial on how to make a pinch pot. And a pinch pot is just a little cup form, but by using a bit more clay and manipulating it a little bit differently, we can start to make bigger forms like jugs using the very similar technique. So, if I can get the screen down on my work surface, today I'm going to be showing you how to make jugs a little bit like this. So if you can all see there, we're going to make one a little bit like this one over here. But obviously, similar technique, if you just manipulate it, you can make much rounder one, much taller one, kind of wiggly in between one, whatever you like. So, to start off with, we're just going to take out one of our bags of clay. And as I said, if you don't have Sculpd clay with you at home right now, or are using your own sort of clay, it will be very similar technique as long as you have some air drying clay with you. So I'm just going to unwrap my clay. And I'm going to take out about 2/3 of the clay. So to break the clay apart, it's a good idea to give it a little bit of a twist. And that will help you just separate it easily. If you are working with your own clay at home and you're worried that you might not have enough, just make sure that you set aside a little bit of clay for the handle that we're going to make later. So it will be the same technique, so don't worry if you feel like then your jug's going to be thrown off by taking a little bit of clay off. It will be fine if you don't have exactly the same amount as me, but it's just good to reserve a bit for if you do want to make a handle. So, with the lump of clay that we've got out of our bag, just going to pop it down on our work surface, and if you do have something to wrap the rest of your clay back up in, like the plastic that your clay comes wrapped in initially, then just wrap it back up and set it aside so that it is nice and airtight and won't be drying out as we're working with the rest of the clay.
Rose, can I just ask something? I think a couple of people in the chat have just said, how many grams of clay do they need if they're measuring it out?
So it's not so much a measurement, but I would say that each of our bags is roughly 1 kilogram of clay, so anywhere in the kind of 600 to 700 grams of clay would be good. Maybe more on the kind of 600 possibly, unless you would like a bigger jug.
And is it 2/3 of the bag, did you say? I think someone's just asked if the whole bag. Yeah, 2/3 of the bag. Okay.
There we go. But as I said, don't feel like it's an exact science or anything. It is just kind of a rough amount. Sorry, I think we've got a message from Haley. Sorry, would you mind reading that out for me, Holly?
Yeah, it just says, what's the bit you broke off for the handle?
Yeah, so for the bit I broke off, we're not going to use all of this for the handle unless you want a massive, really nice chunky handle. But it's part of this we'll use for the handle, and part of it you could use to keep accessorizing it, adding more handles if you like. But mainly we're just not going to use all of the clay today, just because it's quite a bit of clay that we get in the bag, and it means that we'll make a nice manageable sized jug. So if you do have any clay left over at the end of the session and it is from us, then all you have to do to keep it nice and fresh is to wrap it back up in this plastic and then pop it back in your Sculpd bag, reseal it at the top. It's got a little reseal sandwich clip, and that will mean that it is fresh and ready to go for about 4 to 6 months. So if, 4 months down the line, you need to whip out a quick emergency birthday present for a relative or a friend, then you can still use your clay to, whip out a quick jug or something, and it will still be good to go. So, with the lump of clay that we got out on our work surface, all we're going to do is start rounding it out. So you can do a bit of this, might be a bit big and unwieldy, and possibly get a bit flying saucer shaped if you try and do that too much. So it's also a good idea to give it a pat with the palm of your hand and just knock those lumps out of it. And you'll probably find that there are little creases and little dips all over your ball of clay. And if that is the case and you're trying to even it out, then simply smooth over it with your finger Or if you do have some tools and you find it a bit difficult to do that, so if you had really nice long acrylic nails or something and they were getting in the way, then you could use one of the tools to smooth it over instead. But as I said, if your hands work for you, or if you don't have any tools, then just use whatever is easiest to you. So just knocking it into a nice round shape. And what we're aiming for is for it to be kind of as spherical as we can make it. There we go. And you can really take as long as you want doing this. A lot of people tell me that they just want to stop at this stage and just make a really nice round lump of clay because it's really satisfying to do. So I'm just smoothing over any of those lumps, any of those wrinkles. So we've got a nice spherical ball of clay. It's also quite good to take out some of your frustration from the end of the day on it. There we go. So when you've got something that is roughly spherical, and don't worry if it's not kind of perfect, just something kind of roughly as round as this will be ideal. All that we're going to do is now poke a hole in it with our thumb. So this is the way that we start making a pinch pot. So I'm just going to stick my thumb in so that when I take it out, there's a little dip in it like that. And to make a pinch pot, what we do is use a pinching motion. So we'd use our thumb on the inside of our pot and our index finger on the outside. And don't quite do this yet, but then pinch around it like that to start pulling it into a little bowl. We, however, want to pull ours up into a taller form to make that jug. So we're going to postpone that pinching process until we've rolled it out and made it into a taller form. So once you've put that little dip in your ball of clay, and you're just going to put the dip in kind of about a little bit lower than midway into the ball. So it doesn't matter how big your thumb is or how big the ball of clay is, it's just going to be slightly lower than midway. But again, it's not an exact science, so don't worry if you're thinking, I don't know exactly where slightly lower than midway is. Then, when you've done that, what we're going to do is start rolling our piece along our work surface. And when you're doing this, we're going to try and apply a little bit more pressure on the end of your clay that has the hole in it, so that we can start to get this nice tapered effect here where it's a bit tighter at the top. So I'm just rolling and pressing down harder on the top of my piece to get this more triangular effect. It's also a good idea at this stage to press down a little bit. Don't worry, Katie, if you've lost the hole, we can remake the hole. It's just, you know, handy to have a start to it, but it's not essential at this stage. Don't worry if yours has disappeared. So it's handy to give it a little bit of a pat down on your work surface at this stage to start getting a nice flat top, and also repeat the same on the bottom so that you have a nice flat bottom, and this will also help you center your piece a little bit better. So I'm just continuing rolling it, nice and smaller at the top. And again, just kind of patting it down on my work surface so that I get that nice flat bottom to my piece. There we go. So it might look a little bit like a volcano at this stage. Don't worry if that is the case. It won't look like a volcano forever. There we go. And don't worry if you've got it quite tight at the top, because we'll broaden it again. There we go. So once you've got a sort of pyramid shape that you're happy with, don't worry if you are still kind of rolling this and developing the shape of it. As I said, you will be able to go back and watch this again afterwards, so if you feel like you've fallen behind at any stage or would like to catch up, then don't worry, you can go back and watch it again. But also, if you do feel like I've rushed ahead and would like to ask a question, then please just put it in the chat and we can read it out and I'll answer for you. So, once you've got to stage like this, you can now start to use that pinching motion that I mentioned earlier. So because it's a slightly bigger form now, we're going to use our thumb on the inside and then our whole hand on the outside. So Captain Crawley Bumble, don't worry if you've got a bit of a hole in the bottom. That is absolutely fine. For one thing, no one's going to see it, and also the most expensive wine bottles have a nice dip in the bottom, so maybe your piece is just expensive looking. But if you did want to get rid of that hole, then you could paste a little bit of the extra clay on the bottom. So say if I put a dip in the bottom of my piece there, I could then just take an extra little piece of clay, paste that over, and then just blend it out. And same goes for if you get any other little dips in your piece as we're working with it. If you find that you can't just buff it out with your finger, then it might be a good idea to go in and just paste an extra little piece of clay over it. And there's no shame in doing that, and it will also help reinforce our piece by giving it a little extra piece of thickness to the walls. So don't worry about it being poor form or anything, because if you also have heard that you need to attach things a certain way for them to be properly attached with pottery, that is true, particularly in kind of kiln firing pottery. But if we're just pasting a little piece on to cover something up, it's not going to need to take any major force or strain or anything, the same way a handle would, so we can just patch it on like that. So once you've got this volcano shape, as I said, we can start using that pinching motion that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to use my thumb on the inside and my whole hand on my outside, and just start to lightly pinch around and rotate my piece as I go to open the top of my jug up. So the reason we rotate it is just so that this weight is evenly distributed. So as I'm going, I'm just pinching my piece like that to start opening it up. And by the way, don't worry if yours, like mine, is totally uneven around the top like this. A, we'll sort that out, and B, we could also use the higher bits later to help develop the lip of our jug, so it is not a problem at all. So just pinching and rotating our piece. And you'll probably find that in the process of doing this, you've lost that nice flat shape and surface that you developed from rolling it along your work surface. And if that is the case, we're just going to re-go in and start rolling it again. So if at any point you have to do something that means that the surface of the outside of your piece has started to look a bit bobbly and full of fingerprints again, then just keep going in and rolling it to regain that nice smooth surface. There we go. If at any point you do put down your piece on your work surface and your work surface turns out to be covered in lots of little light pieces of clay dust, then that is when we would start to use our sponge and our bowl or a glass of water. So if you have put it down and you find that it's covered in lots of little bits of clay, then all you have to do is dip your sponge in a little bit of water and then swipe it off like so. Now, if you are using some water in your piece, I would encourage you to be conservative with your usage, just because there's nothing wrong if you use too much water. I was teaching a gentleman recently who tipped his whole glass of water over his piece and it was still fine. So don't worry if you do think, oh no, I've already added too much water. It will, the clay will soak it back up and you will be able to keep working with it. But the reason I encourage us to be a bit conservative with our water usage is just that if you do add a lot of water to your piece, then it may get a little bit sticky, a little bit slippery to work with, and it can just be a bit easier if it's slightly drier. If you feel like it's so dry that it's actually making it more difficult to work with, then just rehydrating it with a bit of water on your sponge will help you.
Rose, there's a couple of questions. So one from Claire, which says, mine is cracking, any tips?
Yeah,
so I don't know if you have any tips for cracking.
Oh, that's okay. So Claire, if it is actually cracking, then either, if it's just little tiny cracks like are popping up in mine, then you may be able to just buff it out with your finger, just swiping over it like that. But if you feel like they're a bit more fundamental and they're kind of bigger cracks from your clay properly drying out, then you can use a little bit of water on your sponge, as I just showed you, to kind of swipe over and rub that water in to rehydrate it. And if you do find that you've got a crack that is kind of unsalvageable and is really not wanting to be smoothed over, not wanting to be rehydrated, then it might be worth making a sort of plaster out of some extra clay and pasting it over to reinforce wherever that area is. And then obviously smoothing it out onto your piece like we did at the bottom. But I would try just kind of rubbing a bit of water in first and seeing how you go with that. There we go, so just rolling my piece along the surface. And again, giving a thump down whenever I feel like it's lost some of that definition. So, once you've got to a stage like this, don't worry if it's not as deep as you think a jug should be. We'll sort that out again later. But I'm just going to pinch it a little bit more to make it a bit wider. And then all I'm going to do is really simple, just start smoothing around the top of my piece with my finger to start making a nice smooth surface. So if you do have these higher ridges like this, don't worry about them that much if you kind of have one in particular that you think might be good to start forming your lip out of. But if you have more than one like I do, then it might be worth swiping inwards with your finger and just blending that excess clay out on the inside of your piece, just to even it out so that it's nice and roughly level around the top of your creation.
Rose, Sarah says her jug has lost its wider base, it's looking very straight. Is that a problem, or?
That isn't a problem at all, and to some extent when we're working with clay, and this is going to sound really cheesy, but I would encourage you to go where the clay takes you. So if you do find that your clay has formed into kind of straighter jug, then that is absolutely fine if you are happier with it being a straighter jug. If you did want it to be a bit more cylindrical again, then either you could add a bit more weight to the base, or later on try and carve a bit of clay off the top of your piece to remake that tapered effect. And I'll show you later on how we would carve our piece. But if you're happy with a straight jug, then you know your straight jug might be lovely. It's just that in this instance, the one that we've made is a bit more tapered, which is why I'm showing you that particular technique. But don't worry too much if you find that your piece isn't looking exactly like mine. You know, everyone's piece.
How far should your thumb go down? Sorry, I think Jackie asked how far her thumb should go down.
So it's a bit of a tricky science because everyone's thumb is a different length, but just kind of as far down as your thumb can go is what I would say. But if it's not feeling super deep, and mine isn't kind of as deep as a normal jug would be, don't worry, because we can hollow it out a little bit more later. So with the surface of my piece, I'm just going around with my finger and smoothing it out and making it nice and level. And any little extra kind of thick pieces around the rim, I'm just blending back inside my jug. And as I said, I'm not worrying too much about this extra tall piece I have over here, because I'll just use that to make the lip of my piece. And if it has started drying out a little bit, then I'm just going to use a bit of water on my finger to help rehydrate the clay and make that blending a little bit easier. There we go. Now, once I've got a fairly smooth surface to the top of my jug, before I go in and make the lip, I'm then just going to reshape the body of our piece. Because after we've made the lip, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to roll it and reinforce that shape, because as you can see, if you have a lip attached to your piece, it's going to get in the way when you're trying to roll it to make those smooth sides. So just making sure that I'm really happy with the shape of my piece. But yeah, the same principle of going where the clay takes you will work for kind of any piece you're making, in that if you think you're making a nice kind of low minimalist vase, but you end up with a tall, wonky, abstract one, then I would encourage you, you know, on another project, a different time, then I would encourage you to just go with the tall, wonky, abstract vase, because you'll probably still end up making something that is really cool and that you're proud of, but it may just not be what you first envisioned for your piece. So it will be a much more relaxing and enjoyable process, hopefully, if you do just kind of give in to whatever the clay wants to do.
A couple more questions. So I think Claudia has asked, where should the lip be? And then Jenny has asked, the top of hers has completely widened. Is it best to just start again?
So the lip, doesn't matter where the lip is on your piece, because it should probably be kind of roughly round, and don't worry if yours isn't kind of quite super round, as you can always squish it into a rounder shape. But within that circle, it doesn't matter where the lip is. And then in terms of if the top of your piece has got really wide, if you feel like it's got so wide that it's collapsing in on itself or collapsing out, then possibly it might be a good idea to squish your clay down and start again. But if you'd just like to reinforce it a bit, then you can use the same patching technique that we used earlier. So just add a little bit of clay, and either on the inside of your piece or on the outside of your piece, then you can just blend on an extra bit of clay to reinforce it. But if it's just purely an aesthetic thing and you wanted a thinner top to your piece, it will be easier to squish it down and start again. But also a really nice wide top to your piece may be absolutely fine. But yeah, if it is you feel like it's a bit irredeemably thin, or if you would just aesthetically like it to have that tapered look, then possibly just squish it down and start again. But it really will just be good practice for you to try again. And if you have any questions or forget any stages in the process, then just put a message in the chat and I'll recap on how you do it.
Joe has just asked, I've got a big indent in the bottom, does that matter?
That's absolutely fine. As I said earlier, you could patch that up if you wanted to, but if you've got a big indent, it's really not the end of the world. In fact, I think this piece, the example piece we have here, has a bit of an indent, so you're actually right on target for our example piece. So, once you've got the top of your piece nice and relatively tidy, we're going to start making the lip. So, to make the lip, what I'm going to do is put my finger, and I'm using my index finger, but you can use any finger for this, on the inside of my piece and kind of support it underneath with a couple of other fingers like that, so that they dip in under where we're going to have the bottom of the lip. And then with my finger I'm just going to start swiping with it like so, start pulling out this lip, and then once I've got that going a little bit, I'm going to support it underneath with my fingers like that. So it might look a little bit like a dolphin's nose at this stage. We're then just going to go in and tidy it up a little bit. So your clay will probably have started to crack a little bit as you've started pulling it into a lip. And don't worry if that is the case, because you will likely just be able to buff it out with your finger. But if not, then just a little bit of water on your finger will help you smooth out even more. Then once you've kind of pulled out the lip of your piece, just go in and pinch it underneath to start defining that, and pinching it in to make that nice smooth spout. And then once you've kind of fiddled around and got a lip that you're happy with, just keep blending it out into the rim of your piece. Now,
Rosie has asked, please can you recap how we start forming the lip?
So, all that you're going to do is take, and I'll kind of half demonstrate on this side of my piece so you can see. I'm going to have my fingers underneath like that, and then with one finger on the inside, I'm then just going to kind of swipe and pull out like that. I won't fully pull it out on this piece because all I'll get is something like this on the opposite side, but I've basically supported it underneath with my index finger and my thumb, and then swiped it with my index finger like this. Then if you've got a little bit of a fat lip, as we have here, it might be a good time to get your ribbon tool involved. So your ribbon tool is just this tool with little metal pieces at either end. And again, don't worry if you don't have this, because you can do very similar thing with a knife. But I'm just going to shave off any little excess on the lip of my piece so that it's nice and streamlined, and it doesn't have kind of extra little bobbly pieces all over it. There we go. And it may again be a little bit kind of cracking underneath, and either just buff that out or use a little bit of water on your finger or your sponge to buff it out.
Katie, I don't know if you were just talking to Rose then, but I don't think we could hear, so if you were, then we couldn't hear, but... Naya's asked, how wide do you want the sides to be, please?
How wide do the sides need to be? So if you mean like the thickness of the side here, I'd say mine are probably about 1.5 centimeters thick, but it really doesn't matter too much. I'd leave it at least about 1 centimeter thick, just that by leaving it a bit thicker, we will have a bit more flexibility with it. So don't Don't worry if you feel like it is too thick, because given that this is just an ornamental jug, it doesn't really matter how thick it is. And if it is really thick, it might make a great doorstop for you. But if you are kind of worried about how thick it is, just try and leave it about a centimetre thick. There we go. So I'm just, again, kind of tidying that up and rounding out the top of my piece. And giving it an extra little pinch if I want it to be a bit rounder at the top. Now, if you've done all of this and you think it would be beneficial to go in and give it a roll again, you can do a semi-roll. You just won't be able to roll the whole way around as your lip will get in the way. So just kind of roll it as much as you can without squishing the lip of your piece. There we go. Now, if you did want to hollow out the inside of your piece a bit more, then you can use, again, your ribbon tool for this, or if you don't happen to have any of the tools, something like a spoon will also work well. So what I'm going to do is go in with my ribbon tool and peel off any excess clay that we don't want in there. So when you peel it off, it will take off little ribbons of clay like this, which is why it's called the ribbon tool. So just to show you inside a bit more clearly there, you won't be able to see right inside my piece, but I'm just scraping ribbons of clay off the inside like that. And that will help you take off a bit of excess weight if you do want there to be a bit of extra space in there. Now, because it is air dry clay, it won't be perfect for using water in, so this is a jug either for ornamental purposes or to keep dried flowers in. So it really doesn't need to be very deep, particularly if it is just for ornamental purposes. So don't worry too much if your jug is only about this deep. Only anyone actually looking on the inside is going to worry about that. So if you're fine with it, then that's no problem. But if you want to save some of your extra clay, or just have a bit of a lighter or finer piece, or have more space to put dried flowers in, then that will be helpful. There we go. And then just kind of re-tidying up any messiness that I've created at the top of my piece. If, like me, you have nails that stab into your piece all the time and leave little marks, then either just go and smooth those with your finger afterwards, or again, a sponge will help with that. So, if the top of your piece isn't kind of super, have a really sharp top edge to it, then a good thing you can do is to carve into it. So to carve into air dry clay, we're gonna let it sit for about 6 to 12 hours until it has dried out, until we what we call leather hard. So leather hard is when the clay is still this mid-grey color and it's still malleable. We can still play around with it a bit, but it will be a lot firmer, so it will hold its structure a lot better, and you won't be able to squish it in like I will be able to do with that one. So when it is a lot firmer, it means that we can cut into it and it will hold its shape and make a really nice clean cut. So this is Slight Art Attack. This is a piece I made earlier today, and because it is now kind of much stiffer, so you'll be able to see it, I can't really like squish in on that at all, and it's holding its shape really nicely. So what I can do is, with this flat side of the triangular end of my needle tool, and if, as I said, you don't have this tool, just try a similar technique with a knife and just scrape it along the top of your piece to shave off any little excess pieces of clay. any little lumps or anything we can just smooth over with our ribbon tool so that you've got a nice even top edge. There we go, and the ribbons of clay will be a lot smaller than the ones you saw me scoop out on the inside of our piece, just because this has started to dry out a bit now. And then if it's looking a bit rough, just go in afterwards and give it a polish with your finger to make it nice and smooth again. Then this little raggedy inside edge, again, I'm just going to use now the side of the ribbon tool to carve that so that it's nice and clean. And that can really help elevate your pieces so that they've got those extra sharp edges and they look a bit more professional rather than, you know, a bit hand finished with your fingers. If you do like the rustic hand finish look, then that is wonderful, and that might be exactly the look that you're going for. But if you do want something that looks really clean and sharp, then carving into it like that can help you smooth it up. So, as I said, don't worry if right now the one that you're working on is a bit uneven, a bit bubbly like mine is. That is fine, and you can sort it all out later. So the next stage that we're going to do is to attach our handle, and it will be a bit tricky to keep shaping the rest of it after we've attached the handle. So just make sure that you've got a lip to your piece that you are happy with. So I'm just pinching that out and smoothing the sides with my finger as I go. So if you are ready to attach a handle to your piece, if that's something that you want for your piece, then all we're going to do is take an extra bit of clay from the clay that we set aside. So this is why it's handy to have that extra bit of clay reserved, as well as for, you know, patching and other things. And I'm then just going to kind of pat it into a lump, and then it will be quite messy and full of those wrinkles like that. And again, like we did earlier, I'm just going to smooth that out with my finger and smooth it over. So it's not necessarily a spherical ball or anything, but just so that the lump is kind of nice and smooth and not covered in all those wrinkles. There we go. So once you've done that and kind of patted it into a rounder form, then we can start rolling it out into a sausage. So I'm just using the palm of my hand to do this. You might also find it works well with your fingers if you flex them like that. It might make life a bit easier for you. And I'm just going to roll this out until it's roughly the thickness I want my handle to be. And once it gets a bit longer, just kind of move your hand up and down as you're rolling. So you'll see I move from one side to the other so that it's nice and even. Now, once it's got about, you know, that long roughly, then, and don't, you know, again, don't worry about it being too precise, because as long as it's kind of roughly that long, or, you know, any longer than that is fine, but kind of have at least that, I'd say this much rolled out, that will be handy. Then I'm just going to pop it down on my work surface and start sliding my finger across it. just kind of gently slide it across so that you're starting to develop a nice smooth surface. So if you had a rolling pin or something handy, or if you do have a bottle of wine or something, then you could use that to do this and roll it out like that. But just make sure to pick it up every now and then and flip it over so that it isn't stuck to your work surface. So I'm just smoothing it out with my finger into a nice flat strip. Now don't worry, this isn't going to be the biggest handle you've ever seen or anything. We're going to trim it down in a minute. So I'm making my handle kind of roughly 1/2 centimetre to 1 centimetre thick, but you can go thicker if you like. I would probably say don't go thinner than about 1/2 centimetre, as your handle won't be as strong. It might be a bit difficult to attach. But if you've rolled it out and you think it's too thin, just squish it up and roll it out again. It shouldn't take too long, so don't fret too much. So once I've got this long strip, I'm going to take one of my knife tools, and again, the knife tool you can just easily replace obviously with a knife. So if you have a butter knife or something, that will work really well. And I'm just going to slice down the edge of this strip and just scrape off the uneven sides so that I have a nice straight-sided strip of clay. There we go. So I'm actually going to make my handle a little bit thinner than this, but it is up to you however thick you want to make your handle. There we go. Now once you've got this nice strip, I'm then just, with my finger, I'm going to lightly rub those sharp edges and turn it around so I can rub the other side as well, and then flip it over and repeat that process on the bottom of the strip. There we go. And if it's got a little bit bobbly and uneven again in this process, just go back in with your knife or whatever your cutting tool is and just slice off that excess again. So once you've got a strip that you're happy with the smoothness and how it is looking, it's kind of got a nice even and thickness, then I'm just going to, with my knife tool, cut off the end so that it's nice and neat. There we go. So what I've got is something like that. And this is roughly how long your handle should be if you're wanting to make it like the handle on this jug. But if you end up with more and want a really kind of long elaborate handle, or if you have less and would just like a nice petite handle, then don't worry, because it will be exactly the same process and will just help personalize your piece a little bit. So to attach my handle to my pot, I'm going to first just have a look at where I want it to attach. So just kind of like lay it on your piece wherever you think it's going to go. So I'm going to attach this end of my handle up here on the top of my piece, and then kind of midway down my piece, a bit below halfway, I want to attach my bottom point. Now, when you stick the two pieces of clay together, you'll probably find when you take them apart, it leaves a little suction mark on each side. Either you can use that to take mark of where you want your handle and your pot to attach, but if you find it's not leaving enough of a mark for you, you know, your eyesight's not best, then you might like to put a little mark in with one of your tools. So I've just used this needle tool, which you could again replace with something like a toothpick or a knife, and just put a mark there where I'm going to attach it. And then, for the sake of this, I'll just also put a little point in the center back of my jug where I want the handle to attach to the rim. So I've got a little point here and a little point at the center back of the rim of my jug. Now, each of the points on my handle and my pot that I want to attach to each other, I need to rough up a little bit. So for this, I'm going to use this thin end of the needle tool, but as I said, something like a toothpick or a fork or a knife will do a similar job. So wherever I am going to attach the handle and the pot, I'm just going to start making little crisscross marks in the clay. Just like that. And don't worry if these aren't particularly neat or anything, they don't need to be super neat. But basically little crisscrosses or little diamonds in the clay. And I'll just repeat that on the other end of my handle as well. And then wherever I've put those markers onto my pot, again, I'm going to repeat that crisscrossing process. I've got little crisscrosses up there, and again on this lower part where the bottom of my handle will attach. So as I said, they really don't need to be very neat. Mine aren't very neat, clearly, so don't stress too much if they aren't recognizable as crisscrosses. We're just roughing up the surface of the clay a little bit. And the reason we do this is that when we're attaching two pieces of clay together, it's absolutely fine to attach a piece by just kind of pasting it on when we're just adding a bit of thickness to the walls. But when we need something to be really nice and structurally sound, a join like that will be quite weak because it's a bit like the equivalent of just kind of high-fiving someone with sticky hands or holding hands like that. Whereas if we rough up the clay a little bit and make more areas to bond together, when we join them together, the bond will be a lot more like when you link fingers with someone. It will be a lot tighter of a join and a lot more difficult for the clay to break apart. So it's just important that we do this on any areas of clay that need to take some strain. So if, for instance, you were making a sculpture of a cactus, it would be exactly the same for attaching something like the arm to a cactus. It doesn't need to be a handle. So if you have been working with your clay for a couple of hours and it started to dry out a little bit, and it probably won't be the case if you have taken your clay fresh out of the pack for this session, but if you have been working with it for a couple of hours, or this is 5 months along the line, and you feel like it's a little bit drier and could do with some rehydrating, then just take a little bit of water on your finger and rub it into each of the points that you've roughed up so that they get nice and sticky. And this will help glue those points together a little bit better. I'm just doing that same rubbing in of water onto each of these points. But as I said, you probably won't need to do this on your pieces, but it's just worth you knowing for if you are making something, as I said, on the weekend or in a few months. So once I've done that, when I then go to attach the two roughed up points together, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a wiggle. I'll rotate it around a little bit so that it glues together just that little bit more. All of the fibers interlock. There we go. So I've got those pieces nice and smoothed out onto my jug, and I can then start with my finger blending out that handle. So don't worry if it's adding too much thickness to the top rim of your jug now and making it uneven again. we can sort that out by carving it off later, but for now we're just blending them out so that they're really seamlessly joined. And you'll probably end up with a lot of excess clay here that is hanging over the lip of your, not the lip, the rim of your jug. So just with your finger, smooth that back down on the inside of your piece. And you may start to lose a bit of the nice neat shape that you've made for your pot in this process. Don't worry, because the clay is still so fresh and malleable, we can kind of reform it once we've fully smoothed out the handle. There we go. Now, I'm just going to do exactly the same process with the bottom of my piece and just blend it over. And don't worry if you think this is adding too much thickness to the bottom of your piece. As I said, you can either carve it off later, or as you keep on blending it out, it will just redistribute the clay, so it won't be noticeable. Now, I've just attached a kind of nice strip handle like that, but if you wanted to either roll out the sausage and leave the handle like that as a nice round handle, you could also do that, or spend a lot of time making a really nice, fancy, elaborate handle. This is just a little bit of a farmhouse jug handle for now, but if you had loads of time on the weekend and wanted to make a really elaborate handle, then that could be a really lovely design feature. So I've just smoothed that out and just pulled any of that clay kind of up the sides here, so it's nice and neat. Now, on the inside of your handle, it might be a little bit tight and a little bit fiddly to get in there with your fingers, so it could be useful to use a tool or something laying around your house to go in and blend that out. So I'm just going to use my needle tool to get into that top edge of my jug and blend that out, and then smooth it down with this crescent knife. And smoothing out your join will just help make it extra strong. So even if you do want it to have kind of a freshly joined look, what I would recommend doing is fully smoothing it out, but then going in afterwards with a sharp edge and kind of redrawing that line. Now, when you've attached your handle, as I said, you may find that you've lost a bit of that shape. So for instance, my piece is dipping in here. So what I'm going to do is go in with my fingers and just push that back out from the inside out. There we go. So once you have kind of neatened out all of your handle, you've cleaned up any of the surface, shaved off any little excess bits of clay around the top lip that you want to shave off now, but or you could leave them to do later, then it might be fun to start experimenting with some different textures that you can make on your piece. So if you were wanting to wait and carve into your piece later, say if you made your piece in this evening and then wanted to have a go at carving into it tomorrow morning, might be a good idea. And if you are worried that your piece is going to dry out quite a bit in between, then you can wrap it up in some plastic or some cling film, or a damp tea towel or something will help it stay hydrated for you to keep working on. But if you are wanting to kind of play around with some textures on it later, then you can carve into it with your ribbon tool to make patterns as well as neaten it up. So if I take the edge of this triangle side of my needle tool and carve into it, I can start peeling off these little dips and make an interesting texture in my piece. And if you've gone like I have and overshot or something, then you can just neaten it up afterwards. And you don't just have to do dashes with this, you could also, you know, use it to make little flowers or something. Could be a really nice effect. So for instance, that same technique, if I go 5 times in a circle, we'll carve in a little flower. Now the reason that it's handy to also carve into your piece later is because the fresh clay will leave lots of little bubbly, untidy bits as you're carving into it. And by leaving it a little bit later, it means that you can make a nice clean cut without too much tidying up that you have to do. Once you've done something like that, you might like to use another tool to add some little flower details. If you want to have a play around with other tools, however, or as I said, if you don't have any tools, none of these textures are kind of exclusively made by the tools. So if you want to go and have a look in your kitchen drawer for whatever tools you have lying around, I'm sure you'll have lots of things hanging around the house that will also make interesting textures. And if it is something like a kitchen tool, while the clay isn't safe to make something like a mug with, to drink out of, it is non-toxic. So if you wanted to, for instance, experiment with your pizza cutter or a cake tester or something that you thought would make a nice mark in the clay, then all you have to do afterwards is to wash it as normal and it will be good to go on food again. So one of my favorite textures to make is just a really simple one that I make with a knife. So I'm just going to press the tip of my knife in on the flat side like that and make this little triangle mark like so. And if I repeat that in rows, we can start to build up what is sort of a hedgehog texture, or can be like roof tiles if you're making a little model house, or it could be a nice petal texture if, again, you rotated your tool in a circle 5 times. Then you can start to experiment with kind of little flower forms like that. You could also use your needle tool or something similar like a toothpick to draw into your piece. So if you wanted to write something in, or just do a little drawing, a thin tool like this will be perfect for doing those sort of finer illustrations. So you can use that to just draw in a little face or something, particularly if you were to make a piece with a couple of handles on either side and have a little face in the middle, then that can be a really cute look. If you do, however, add a decoration like this and you do it and then think, actually I really don't want that on my piece, then you can either just wipe it off with your finger, or if you find it's a little bit more entrenched like this, a bit of water on your sponge might help. And if, like with these eyes, you've poked in really far, or if you've gone and carved a pattern and you find that it's a bit stubborn to buff out, then just take an extra little bit of clay and just a really tiny piece and paste it over any of those problem areas and blend them out. There we go. Another tool I think can be underestimated in terms of making texture is this fork tool that we have here. So it's got this little frilly edge at the top that you can see if I hold it against my apron. And if you poke that in on the straight side, you get this little line of dots. And it doesn't look very interesting, but either you could play around with making lines with that, or if you kind of repeatedly pressed it in, you can start building up shapes like diamonds, or you could have zigzags going all over your piece, which might be a nice effect. So don't feel like any of your tools is not going to make interesting marks. It all depends on, you know, how you play around with them. You could, however, just spend the rest of your time smoothing over your piece and creating a really nice texture. Now I've added a lot of decoration to my piece and bashed it around a bit, so I'm just going to smooth over an extra piece of clay. And if my piece is squishing in quite a bit like mine is right now, because it's still very malleable, that's okay, because I'll just go back in on the inside and shape it again later. So once I've buffed it out, I'll then press it back out again from the inside and reshape the top of my piece.
Rose, Katie's asked, are Posca, I don't know if that's how you say it, Posca pens suitable once the jug is ready for painting?
Yeah, they absolutely are, but we also have actually literally just released some acrylic paint pens in, so we've got some Mediterranean colours here, and there we go, so you can see, and we've also got some metallic colours, which are my favourite set. They are really lovely. So yeah, any acrylic paint pen like that will work really well on your piece. And what I would recommend though is to put down a white base coat, either with the white paint that we include in our kits, or some other white acrylic paints, so that the colours really pop when you draw on them. But yeah, drawing onto your piece is a lovely decoration technique. So if you just wanted to have a really nice smooth texture on your piece, then it would be a good idea to kind of make sure it's really nice and clean, ready for those illustrations to go on. Happily smoothing away. If you do have any problems, then please feel free to put a message in the chat and I can
I think KMR has written, my handle is quite droopy in Does that matter? And Captain Crawley has asked, please can you recap on how to attach the hand?
So, both good questions. If your handle's a bit droopy and so say like mine is falling down a bit like that and you want it to be a bit more upright, then all you have to do is position it somewhere so that it dries upright. So either once you've finished with your piece, you could use something like this bowl to kind of prop it up underneath so that it dries propped up, and when it's kind of dried out for a little bit, the clay will stiffen up and then support itself. So it will dry really nice and hard like that, or kind of prop it up against something taller so that it sits in the shape that you want it to. And in terms of attaching your handle, I'll just roll out another handle for you. There we go. So I'll just attach this handle at one end so that you can see the attaching process. So all I'm going to do is stick it to my piece wherever I want it to attach. And so if that is at the top of your piece, kind of have it flat side down onto the lip, or if it was at the bottom, then press those 2 points together like that. And then wherever you want it to attach, just pop a mark in your pot or on the lip of your piece so that you know where you're attaching it. And then with your knife or a needle tool or something, just draw some little crisscross marks in the clay on your handle and on the point on your pot that you're going to attach, so it's nice and roughed up. And as I said earlier, if it is getting a little bit dry, then just rub a little bit of water in so that it gets nice and sticky and gluey. And I'll just do that again on the point on my handle. Now, when you go to attach the roughed up points together, just give them a bit of a wiggle as you push them onto each other. And once you've done that, you're ready to go blending out whatever you've attached. There we go. If you have any more problems with that, let me know in the chat, and I can go over it again or in more detail.
I think Sarah's asking if you mess up, she has, can she squish it all and pop it back in the packaging and have another go at the weekend?
So you definitely can, Sarah. I'd encourage you not to do that and to embrace the wobbliness of your piece. But yes, if you feel that it's totally redeemable and you just want to have another go with your clay, then yeah, you can squish the clay back down. Wrap it back up in the plastic that it comes in and properly reseal it in your bag. And as I said, it should then be good for about 4 to 6 months. So when you are popping it back in the bag, if you feel like you've played around with it quite a lot in this session and it is starting to get a bit dry, it might be a good idea to just sponge a little bit of water onto it before you wrap it back up in the plastic, so that by the time you next take it out, it's soaked up some of that water and will be nice and malleable next time you use it. No problem. But yeah, there's also no shame. If it helps anyone, I have squished down plenty of my pieces previously, so it won't necessarily go perfect the first time you try. But as we said, this tutorial will be available for you guys to watch again. And also, there's been a lot of information that I've thrown at you during this about, you know, you paint first and then you seal second, or whether the clay is, you know, non-toxic and all of that. And all of that information is in the FAQs on our website. So either feel free to send us a message on Instagram or an email with any questions you have after the session, or check out the FAQs on our website, because it's quite likely there will be an answer to a lot of those things in that information. But yeah, don't feel like this is your one opportunity. If you haven't been taking notes and you're worried that you're going to miss some information, you will be able to get it again. Do I recommend sanding before painting? Was that Is that correct, Holly?
I don't know what that one is. Oh yeah, no, Rosie has asked, do you recommend sanding before painting? And someone else has asked, can I add small shells at this stage? Yeah, there's 2 questions.
So just to quickly answer the shell one, yes, you absolutely can add some shells or stick some beads in it, or kind of some interesting little rocks or something. Just make sure that they're properly encased in the clay so that when it dries, they will be locked in there. But that can be a really, really cool technique and kind of more like a mosaic effect on your piece. And then also, to answer this first one, you can sand your piece. You don't need to paint it. Probably it's a better idea to just keep rubbing it and making a really nice smooth surface on your piece. But if you do want to sand your piece for any reason, then what we would recommend is to do it with a mask on and do it outside or somewhere really well ventilated so that you're not breathing in loads of clay dust. Just that it is absolutely fine to work with like this, but if you're sanding it, you will be generating a lot of dust. So it's just a good idea to be extra safe and do it outside and with a mask on. And when you're doing that, you'll probably find that it fluffs up a lot of little, lots of little hairs in the clay that you may have noticed as we're working with it. Don't worry about any of those little fibers. It's not cat hair or anything. They are just little nylon fibers in the clay to help reinforce it, so that when it is dry, it's really nice and strong. There we go. And if you've made a really lovely outside to your piece and it's all looking pristine, then you can just be making the inside of your piece look as good as the outside, and potentially hollowing it out a little bit more. But also, if you are totally satisfied with your piece and you think it is perfect as is, then you can pop it out to dry. When you are leaving it to dry, don't feel tempted to, even though it can go in the kiln, don't feel tempted to put it in the oven or something. Just that if you put it in a low oven or right on top of a radiator, then putting it that close to a heat source will, that's kind of a bit unregulated, will mean that it starts to dry unevenly potentially, and that could cause cracking. So it is a good idea to just leave it somewhere well ventilated, so kind of on top of your fridge, on a shelf or something. If you don't have a pet or a family member that might knock it off, then anywhere well ventilated like that is a good idea. And potentially leave it on a piece of plastic or something so that it doesn't get stuck to your windowsill or whatever it is. I think we've had a few more questions. Would you mind just reading them out for me, Holly? Oh, Barbara, I'm glad you've had so much fun. No problem, guys. So, as Holly said in the chat, please feel free to post it on Instagram, post your jug on Instagram when you're finished with it, and tag us and tag Papier so that we can see what you've made, because it would be amazing to see all of your creations, particularly if you've gone on to paint them and decorate them. We would love to see, and that means that you will be entered in our competition. But even if you're not there to compete, it would just be lovely to see what everyone's made in the session. Don't worry, Linda, if it's not looking exactly like mine. If it helps, I've made many jugs that haven't looked right the first time round. Oh, sorry, I think someone's just accidentally started sharing their screen. There we go, perfect. Yeah, and also if you do feel like maybe this first jug that you've made isn't what you want to enter for the competition, then yeah, have another go on the weekend and see how you go a second time. And you know, feel free to enter both of them. And also it's just worth you knowing if you have been wearing, you know, your favorite top or something today and you've got clay all over it, the clay is water soluble, so it will just come out in the wash. And same goes for if you've got it all in your wedding rings or engagement ring or whatever, just wash them and the clay will come out.
I think a couple of people are asking, I think you might have said that, but just a reminder of when we can paint them.
Yes, so after about 48 hours, roughly a couple of days, is when it will be completely dry and ready to paint. So if you see this kind of mid-grey clay, mid-grey colour that the fresh clay is, this jug that we have here is the much lighter shade of grey that your clay will go. So these started life as the same much darker shade of grey, and once your piece is completely dry it will go the same. And as I said, if you're looking to carve your piece, it will still be this same like mid-grey colour as the one we've been using here, but it won't be able to squish in on itself like this one can.
Thank you so much, Rose, for this amazing tutorial. I feel like it's been just a really relaxing and lovely evening.
Oh, no problem.
Does anyone have any kind of last questions or anything that anyone would like to be covered? Just aware of time, just want to make sure everyone.
I'd just like to say thank you. That was really enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been amazing.
Oh, that's okay, guys. I'm glad you've all enjoyed.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
No problem, everyone. Thank you. Hope you enjoy using the rest of your clay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If anyone does have any more questions, please feel free to send us an email or send us a message on Instagram and we'll get back to you.